Hey, what's going on, everyone? Welcome to the Over the Cap podcast. It's November 30th, 2024, and this is Jason Fitzgerald. You can find me on X at Jason_OTC. You can email me, jason at overthecap.com, or you can find me on Blue Sky at overthecap. You can check that out. Hopefully everybody had a good Thanksgiving. We just got back a little bit earlier today. We were away at the in-laws for the weekend, so we watched a couple of the football games there, and I think that's pretty much what we'll talk about today. Still doing our nothing beers here, so we're getting through these next waters. Maybe sometime soon we'll move into our Christmas beers or something like that, and when the time calls. But I guess it is what it is right now, drinking this stuff. But I did enjoy. A couple people sent me some beer selections this week, some things to check out. And there was one in particular that I think I had actually mentioned on last week's podcast. It was a different Southern Tier beer. And I think it's the same one that was mentioned that somebody saw on tap in Pittsburgh, I think it was. So that's the one. So I know they have that in the stores by me. So I'm hoping they still have it. I'll check it out. I'll buy it. Even if I'm not going to have it in the next week or two. At some point after that, I will try that one out and see. So I will give a review on that one a little bit later on. Maybe if there's some time before Christmas, we'll do a podcast with it. If not, maybe a little bit after it. We'll still be in the holiday spirit to try such things out. So anyway, let's start with the Chicago Bears. That was a pretty wild game on Thursday. I watched the beginning of that game, and Chicago was getting beat on pretty bad. I mean, they were defensively, it was okay. I think it's basically been what Chicago's been most of the year now. I don't really watch a lot of Chicago football games. I'm just kind of going with, different things that I might see. But it's more like looking at stats and those kind of things where it seems to be a lot of bend but don't break, like give up a lot of yards, but you end up giving field goals up versus touchdowns. Good, I think, situational defense versus probably overall defense, that kind of stuff. And, we actually turned the game off. The game was pretty poor. My in-laws are big Dallas Cowboys fans, so they were waiting for the later of the two games, really. And they hadn't seen Jacob play in any football games this year, so I ended up putting on one of Jacob's football videos. So they could watch one of the football games from there. They don't take that long, those games. They're the way that I cut those up, they're definitely under an hour. The way that they play out. So by the time we came back to that game, we see Chicago driving at the end, and I'm just amazed at what happens at the end of that game. Like, I don't know if I've ever seen clock management that bad. In a game, and I've seen some pretty bad ones. Like the Herman Edwards years with the Jets were pretty epic when it came to bad clock management, but this was kind of a whole different category. The quarterback gets sacked. Really didn't have much of a chance on that play. I don't know, maybe he could have had some time to throw it away. I'm not even sure. I'm not going to go and rewatch it. I mean, I probably could throw a video on here, but if I throw it on the YouTube portion of the podcast, they'll probably block it out or something like that. But he takes pretty bad sack, pretty brutal sack there, and inexplicably they don't really call timeout. Especially once he realizes that everything is slow to develop after that. Like, the quarterback's in no hurry. He's not rushing the people back. Next thing you know, he's changing the play. And you can see the coach on the sideline basically saying, hurry up, let's go. You see defensive players, at least I think they were defensive players, just other players on the sideline, jumping up and down saying, come on, what are you doing? And, they get one pass off when they should have gotten two plays. And it was brutal. I don't know. You can't watch that. There's no sugarcoating it. And I think when the coach came out after the game and said that, he liked what they did, he thought what they did was right, like, that didn't make any sense. And I don't follow Chicago enough. From what I follow on Twitter, I don't know if Eberflus is not very popular within Chicago because this was shark circling. And I know he's had a lot of close games that he's lost. And there is something to be said for that. I mean, when you, as a coach, when you're losing a lot of close games, that does reflect pretty poorly on you as a coach because it kind of says that there's something bad going down in certain situations. But if you know how to manage your relationships with the people that cover the football team, a lot of times it doesn't spiral to what I saw after that game. And yeah, everyone is going to be critical of it. It was brutal. It was as bad as you could imagine. But it was something that it just went completely out of control after that. And I'm guessing that he just doesn't have that good of a relationship with the people there. And I could be wrong about that, but it was so quick to go after him. Like, he's got to be fired now. He's got to be fired now. That, it seemed like it was just a, kind of icing on the cake. Like, you've got to do it. You've got to do it. You've got to do it. What was he really going to get them anywhere further? I don't know. I'm not going to say yes. I'm not going to say no, simply from not seeing it too much. But I think the expectations for Chicago are way too high for where they are in terms of developing. I think they've done some good things. I think they've done some good things specifically on defense. And a lot of that, I think, is credit to the coach and the coaching staff, as well as the general manager for, I think, some of the moves they've made and the way that they've built things. Offensively, it's a work in progress. It's they spent a lot of money on receivers and they put too much, I think, on the quarterback this year. They have nothing invested in that offensive line, and it's a problem. I think when you have, I think we all agree that quarterbacks control a lot of what you see with the pressures, and the Bears, I think, have been sacked more than any team in the NFL or close to it. And a lot of that is on Williams, I'm sure, but there's also a case where you need, especially when you have a young quarterback, I think you need some kind of confidence boost when those guys in front of you can block for you. And I don't think that the players in Chicago bring that, to where he can get that. So, I think expectations are too high. I actually think that where Chicago isn't terrible. Will another coach do better? I mean, it's entirely possible. And some might say, well, they can't do worse, and that's entirely possible too. The thing that I said with the firing, and this goes back to a lot of the firings that you see in season, whether it was Matt Rule a couple of years ago or Robert Saleh, and it's like, well, why didn't you just do it in the off season? And this one isn't so much why wouldn't you do it in the off season. It's just that these things come across as rash moves when and I said this on Twitter, and I think people were right that responded, to it. My take was this: if he calls timeout, is he fired? Probably not. If the Bears never make a comeback in that game, is he fired? Probably not. So it's like he hurt himself by having a team that made a comeback, and then obviously he makes a very boneheaded decision, but just like when we talk about giving a contract to Daniel Jones or, any kind of player that you want to talk about, focusing on one play, one game. And I know there's more of a track record here, so this isn't a defense, of the entirety of, his job that he's done. But it's like to bring it all down to one play, one decision, one outcome like that, and be that angry about it to where you have to come and fire him. And this was an ownership decision. I don't think this was a general manager decision. I think it was part of the discussion, but it doesn't come across like you have a vision or you have any kind of control of the franchise. It's more like, okay, we're not going to make the playoffs now this year. We know that, and we don't want 5 weeks of negative publicity. what are the odds we're going to move on from him anyway at the end of the year? And I think that's probably what drove the decision. They sent him out there to do a press conference. So at that point in time, they clearly weren't firing him. I think Poles was meeting at that point with the owners of the team. It's bad timing when you do that. I think people have blown that way out of proportion, going over the organization as a joke organization. Again, it's one bad day, basically. It's a bad 24-hour period for them. What's done is done there. Now, I think there were a lot of things he could have said that would have maybe helped the situation a little bit. One is taking responsibility, obviously, for it, where you say, that one was a bad call by me. I should have been more aware of the situation. I should have taken the time out. That won't happen again, that kind of thing. He didn't do that. I think the other approach to it, which is actually a good one, is you talk about, and I know you're going to lose some of the people in the locker room when you do something like that. You go out there and you kind of say, we're building something towards the future. We know at this point in time the playoffs were a long shot. Our goal is not to squeak into the playoffs. Would that be nice? Yes. Our goal isn't to squeak into the playoffs. Our goal is to build something for the future where we're contending for a Super Bowl. And one of the ways that you contend for a Super Bowl is you put your quarterback in situations that he can learn from. This was a good learning situation for Caleb Williams because that's not the way that situation would have been handled by a top tier quarterback. Josh Allen's not playing that situation that way. Patrick Mahomes isn't going to play that way. Matt Stafford isn't going to play that way. Matt Stafford's a veteran who's been around for a long time. I mean, these other guys have been too. Not as long as Stafford, but those guys aren't going to make that kind of mistake. Joe Burrow's probably not making that kind of mistake. Justin Herbert's probably not making that kind of mistake. But sometimes you need to experience those situations to kind of grow from them and understand the way that you have to control the offense and the way that you have to, get with your coaches. And it's a learning experience for the coaches too, right? That, sometimes you do have to take the power out of the hands of the players on the field, if he's not looking at that as a kind of a developmental project for the quarterback. So, that was just kind of my thoughts on that a little bit there. I think, so I do think that firing is rash. I do think that, I think he's done an okay enough job. And I know people are going to say you're crazy. I think he's done an okay enough job that when he goes back and look, they've had a good defense there. He's been a good defensive coordinator before. I'm sure he's going to go back to doing that, to where when he goes back to being a defensive coordinator somewhere, he's going to come out from this, 2-3 years later, and I think have a better feel for what he has to do to improve as a head coach. Whether that's taking more responsibility, whether that is being a better communicator with the people who cover the team, the media that covers the team, with the fan base, with the owners, maybe with the players in the locker room themselves, holding them and himself accountable. I think those are areas where he'll improve to where he might be an effective head coach as a second hire. That's obviously a couple of years down the line, but I think he falls into that category. But again, I think, and this isn't just pertaining to them, I think that, we put too much nowadays, way too much responsibility on the quick turnaround with the young quarterback. And from a realistic standpoint, it does take time. It's not like everybody comes in and is great from day one. All right. So if you're following along, you can see I just pulled up some basic numbers here on the Bears, and just to see where, some of their positions rank within the league. Total value of the team in terms of contracts ranks 20th in the NFL. Offense, they spent about $126 million in contracts. That's 23rd in the NFL. On defense, that number is $119 million. That's 15th in the NFL. If you're looking for a spot where owners are probably upset, it's the cash spent on the active roster at 271.4 ranks 10th. Now, part of the reason they're that high is because even though the quarterback salary this year is low in terms of overall investment, the cash salary this year is high, relatively high, simply because as the first pick in the draft, you get a pretty big signing bonus, and they had two top picks where you get the wide receiver in there as well. I think he was picked fifth, so you had two rookie players that have very large cash salaries this year relative to their annual value, but next year those numbers will drop way down. Injured reserve, they rank 13th with 10, so that's not, in my mind, not too bad. You look at investments by position, and I think this you can see where they've fallen short, and some of this falls on the general manager too, right? So quarterback, all right, it is what it is. They rank 28th. They have the number one overall pick. They don't really have another player that they could have put in there, so where they could have sat him for a year. But it's like you've got an average investment at running back. You've got a very high investment at wide receiver. $58 million in receivers. That ranks fifth in the league because you've got two veterans, one that's like an ultra veteran in Keenan Allen. You have a mid veteran in DJ Moore. Mid meaning not salary wise, mid meaning where he is in terms of his career. And then you've got a high draft pick. You've got $22 million invested in your tight ends. And to me, this is probably too much money invested in skill position players. To be, and I know tight end's not completely skill position, but to have that kind of money invested in the skill positions, and then you jump down to your offensive line, interior offensive line, 11.6 million, 29th in the league. Offensive tackle, 11.3 million, 29th in the league. Now, granted, yeah, some of that is attributed to draft picks or whatever. Their offensive line isn't any good. You can see it. You can see it in the rushing statistics aren't really there. The sack numbers are through the roof. Again, a lot of it's on the back of the quarterback, but if you can build a solid offensive line in front of a rookie quarterback, I think a lot of times you're setting them up for a little bit better possibility of success, to where they at least won't look as distressed out there the way that you saw Williams look at times in that game, and obviously the way he's looked many times during the course of the year. I think that you might be able to go back as well and say they shouldn't have traded Justin Fields, just to have had another player there that you could have worked in. Now, I know that I'm sure they were concerned with, well, then you're going to get players that want to do this and do that. And, you look at the trade they made for Keenan Allen. On paper, it's a fine trade. Again, you get into the investments they have on the team. Maybe you could have tried to find a way to trade for an offensive lineman. That might have done more for you. Using the money. And again, it was only a 1-year investment in Keenan Allen this year for about $20 million. Maybe that $20 million could have gone into another player that could have fortified that offensive line. Skill position players, when your quarterback doesn't have time to throw or doesn't think he has time to throw, and he doesn't have that knowledge yet to, play, to have that game slow down for him, it's not a winning combination. You go defensively, and you can see they're kind of middle of the league. So edge, they rank 16th in spending. Interior defensive line, 24th. Linebacker is 2nd. Cornerback is 15th. Safety is 18th. And I think overall, most people would say they've probably overperformed as a defense. I think a lot of that is on the coaching. And I think you look at that interior defensive line number. Maybe that's part of the reason why they've struggled a little bit against the run sometimes in these games. Maybe they needed to have a little more there, a little less at the linebacker positions. But again, it's just to say that when we look at their record and we look at where they are, and we see that, they're not necessarily competing for the playoffs. When you look at the breakdown of this team, with the exception of some of the names from like a fantasy perspective, I don't see how you would look at this and say, yeah, this is a playoff roster. to me, this is a developing roster. And when we go and we look at Chicago, and let me just switch over, and we look at their salary cap space for next year, on paper right now that not taking into account like rookie contracts and that kind of stuff, they rank fifth in the league in projected cap room at $82 million. If you look at their effective cap space, they are sixth in the league, I think, with $62 million. That includes the cost to bring the roster to 51 and the draft picks that would come in there to help them get there. It's a good number. So again, we shouldn't be focused on this season. Should be focused on how do you improve from this year to take that next step forward. And again, I think if that better relationship was there, you'd be focusing on those positives, which is we had a good start to the year. We lost the game on a bad Hail Mary. We lost the game on a field goal block that can't believe happened. We lost this game here. I'm sure there's one or two other questionable ones that lost this year. Just enough to where, you would look at it and you'd be focusing on those positives. And I think that's the reason that the general manager will certainly be back. I think so, at least, is that you look at those positives and you look at some of the things that they've done to build a roster that obviously people think should be a playoff roster, probably shouldn't, and to still have all this cap room that can be used to continue to improve the team, from the outside while building, through the draft from the inside. It's a pretty good setup that they have. It's going to be, I think it's going to be a very appealing job to someone next year. But again, when you see that kind of rash decision making, it just makes you worry a little bit sometimes about taking, some of those jobs. And then you got the flip side is you've got the Giants that play after that. And the Giants were pretty listless most of the game. Drew Lock just obliterated back there. Awful interception. In there that gets returned for touchdown. Just getting hit left and right. That Giants offensive line is atrocious. They're really, really bad. Defensively, the secondary played okay at times. Dallas dropped a lot of passes. CeeDee Lamb, I don't know what was going on with him. That's the Butterfingers of the Week award going there. You look at the Giants, and this falls, I think, on the general manager a little bit. When you look at the breakdown on this team, and you look at how they've been built. Now, these numbers that I'm going to bring up here do not include Daniel Jones. So they rank 31st in the league with about $217.7 million in contracts. $98 million ranks 29th spending on offense. $110 million ranks 23rd on defense. $218 active cash ranks 29th overall. Like the Bears, they have 10 players on injured reserve and PUP. That's pretty average. But, when you throw those Daniel Jones numbers at $40 million, that jumps the Giants' annual value numbers up to middle of the pack. It throws their cash spending at least middle of the pack. It throws their offense middle of the pack. And you realize this whole team was basically built on Daniel Jones being an effective player. They gave him no weapons. It's basically the one rookie receiver, because I think you can write off Robinson as being anything more than just a whatever. Slayton, that there's no real upside to that. You don't have anything invested at the tight end spot. You got a lot of money at tackle, but, he's hurt, the main person there. Interior offensive line, it's trouble. You rank 20th in spending. And you look at defense, they spent nothing on the secondary. And, there's teams that do that, right? But, they've spent nothing there. So they're 8th in spending at edge. And I wouldn't even say that their edges have played that well. Burns is probably overpaid. Thibodeau had a terrible game. Too many penalties. Just way too many penalties. Interior defensive line is 17th. Dexter Lawrence is now done for the year. So that's a big blow. Linebacker, they're 9th. it's like linebacker makes such a little difference. It's like I think you would have liked to have seen him spend more, um, on that secondary and, kind of build up that team. So I look at this and I see this as more of an indictment on the general manager than I think anything else. I think when you look at the way that this team has been built, it was built with one player in mind. And I don't know if they gave that player really the weapons that he needed. It's like everything was based on Daniel Jones being a star and Malik Neighbors as a rookie being a star. Like that to me, when I'm looking at this breakdown as to how they've spent on this team and how they've built this team, like that was the plan. That's not a plan, that's a prayer. Right? Expecting a first round draft pick at wide receiver to be incredible, that's a prayer. Now, he's been pretty damn good when he's played, but it's a prayer. Expecting Daniel Jones at this point to be a savior, that's a prayer. Now the Giants had no cap room this year. Um, I just look at this as a team that's really bungled everything. I think they're both going to get fired. And, this was a tweet that I put out there as well, which is, how different would things be if the Giants didn't double down on the Daniel Jones deal? And I think they'd be pretty different right now. I don't think the record would be much different, but I think the outlook for the team would be a lot different. Um, and someone made a comment that there's some validity to it. I agreed with a good portion of it that, overall it wouldn't be that different, but you would have a rookie quarterback. And it's like, well, yeah, that's a pretty big deal though, because you would have been in a situation to where you wouldn't have had to deal with all the negativity of the Daniel Jones situation. You would have had all that money that you saved because you would have tagged him for the 1 year. So last year's outcome would have been identical. All right, with the exception of you would have saved 10 million minus whatever money you had to spend replacing Saquon Barkley. Call it 5 million. You would have been better, from that part of it. Everything else would have been the same. Except you would have saved a bunch of money on Daniel Jones, both last year and this year. And this year in the draft, you would have gotten either Penix, Nix, or kid in Minnesota, McCarthy, who's been hurt. Now, Nix looks like he's the real deal. And you may have also been aggressive enough to try to trade up to get one of the other players too. I'm not saying they would have, just that it's a possibility. Okay. But most likely, I think you'd be focused on those three players. So with the exception of the one who gets hurt, to where then you're in the oh woe is me phase, we don't know what the Atlanta quarterback is. Might be terrific, might not be. And you might have had Nix. And Nix would have looked like a functional quarterback with the right coaching, even with this kind of group of cast-offs, because in Denver it's kind of a group of cast-offs as well. Now they have a better offensive line in Denver. I don't know if they've spent a lot more on it. Let's take a look there at the Broncos. Oh no, I'm completely off on them. Yeah, no, they've spent a ton on that offensive line. So they've gone about this the way that I think would make sense when you're bringing in a young quarterback. You've got a veteran of some sort behind him. In this case, that's Zach Wilson, right? And then, who's the other one? Stidham? Is that the other quarterback, or is that on the Raiders? I don't remember. But, you look here, wide receiver spending ranks 23rd, tight end spending ranks 25th, interior offensive line, offensive tackle ranks 7th. So they have those big investments there to give that confidence boost, to give him that extra half a second that he needs, that, maybe that's enough, the difference between him running into a sack versus him saying, okay, I've got that time to try and throw a ball somewhere. And, he's looked pretty solid. So, that might be a difference too, between the two setups that we would see there. Pull up Giants again here. But, I think they've set themselves up to fail. And I think a lot of it stems from that decision with Daniel Jones. You look at where they are in salary cap room next year, it's basically middle of the pack. $60 million full right now, that's 14th, 13th, something like that. Effective cap room, they're probably right around 16 at 40 million. So, they're in a position where, their cap situation's not great. You've got a player like Burns now under a big long-term deal, which you probably wouldn't have done. So you would have had I think it would have been one extra pick probably from that, right? They gave up, a two? But you would have had something extra for him. You would have had the cap space from him. You would have had a setup much like the Bears. You'd be in a better position than the Bears. You would be somewhere close to, I don't think you'd be at the Patriots level. I'd have to run through all these numbers to see where Daniel Jones would have been with, if you took all his money off the books, and did some different things here and there, they'd probably be close to that. You'd be somewhere in the level of Raiders, who are at 90 effective, Cardinals at 98 effective, Patriots at 118, and you'd be in a similar situation as New England where you might think you have that quarterback. The Raiders, you'd be ahead of a team like the Raiders that has no quarterback. They have nothing there. So, I think that they've set themselves up for failure. And I look at this as more of an indictment of the general manager than the head coach. They're both going to go, right? They're a package deal. I think Dable is one who he'll bounce back. Similar to what I mentioned about Eberflus before, in the sense that, they'll go in there and he'll go back to being a coordinator, do probably a pretty good job. And, I think take that step back, evaluate what went wrong in terms of planning and how they built this team and how they veered from their gut feeling, which was right, I think, on Daniel Jones and the roster. And then with influence, of course, from the owner, went in a completely different direction after that one playoff win. It was, if they lose to the Minnesota Vikings, that outcome is completely different. Daniel Jones probably doesn't get that extension if they lose to the Vikings. Kind of ironic that he's on the Vikings right now. I think they made that official. But so that's actually kind of ironic that that's where he ends up when the Vikings are the reason that the Giants are kind of in this situation. But like Dable does some things that I think make sense. You look at some of the fourth down decision making, I think it makes sense. I thought he did something really neat, and apparently he's done this once before, where, in the game, the Giants, Thibodeau, inexplicable, jumps off sides on a 1st and 10 when they have to stop them. They have to stop the Cowboys to get the ball back, to have a chance to tie that game. And he jumps off sides, make it 1st and 5. So he intentionally takes a penalty on the next play, hoping that Dallas will accept it to go to 1st and 10, because at that point, 5 yards, 10 yards doesn't make a difference. It's just you want to make it as hard as possible for them to convert a first down. You want them to have to be able to punt the ball back to you. Dallas smartly declines it to stay at 1st and 5. That was a nice little chess thing. The announcers missed it completely. That's a whole different story. Man, Brady is terrible. I know some people mention like, well, what do you expect? It's his first time on the job. Yeah. But don't put him in that position. Put him in a spot to learn to be an announcer. He's not any good. And he takes away from the game. He's so bad. Especially when you've got a bad game and you need something to work for you. He's just oblivious. You've got, and I know I'm going off topic here from the Giants, but you've got a situation where he's talking about Thanksgiving football and bearing down and how you've got 8 or 9 games left in the season. It's December. There's 5 games after this week. It's not the midway point of the year. Like, I don't even know what he's talking about. And then they've got him, and I'm sure there's pressure on him, and they're telling him, just say something crazy and invent something. And he's talking about the word slooper. Like, I don't need 5 minutes of a talk of slooping. And then the end of the game, this is like one of the greatest, if not the greatest quarterback of all time. He's aware of everything situationally. The entire opposite of what you saw in Chicago. Dallas converts a first down, and Brady goes, I mean, the game's not completely over yet, but it's pretty close now. What? Ugh, just brutal. Just brutal. Get him off those broadcasts. Just go bring him down a level and let him learn to be good at this if he can be. Some people are, some people aren't. Anyway, back to the Giants. So they're in many ways, they're right back to where they were when these guys took over the job, except they're probably in a worse position cap-wise than where they would have been because they tried to do some things to kind of follow up that playoff year with another playoff season, and every move kind of blew up on them going in the wrong direction. That's a tough one, for them. But they were set up for failure with the way they built this team, and it played out exactly as it should have, I think, on the field. And these guys really didn't have a chance with it. And, I think one of the other things that we can learn a lot from this is, and I know there's a lot of people who listen that work in teams, and maybe some of them one day will be a general manager. There's been a handful that have gotten that job before that have at least listened once in a while to this. Sorry, we're popping back in here. I went to go grab another drink, before I was going to talk a little bit about just some generalized, I think, mistakes that are being made here in the league. But I think the kids, since they're awake, since I'm recording this earlier than usual, want to come and say hello. So we'll get a guest appearance from Megan. You got anything to say, Megan?
I do sock curls.
Yes, my daughter now does sock curls. I don't know what this is, but she walks around with socks in her hair. So it's kind of like Princess Leia looking, kind of something or other with socks in the side of her hair to attempt to curl her hair. So that's Megan's beauty tips. So if you've got a 15-year-old daughter that would like to know about how to try to curl their hair, you can try sock curls. And
that could be me.
What am I looking at?
Took a picture with Taylor Swift.
Oh, and the picture yesterday from the Chiefs game with Taylor Swift.
I want to take a
that
picture.
She thinks is very interesting. Okay, thank you, Megan. You can be on your way now. Jake, you got anything to say?
Bye.
Bye. Okay, that's all we've got from Jacob there. All right. Okay, that was a quick guest appearance from the two of them there. That's hopefully the only guest appearance of the night, but we'll see. So anyway, I think the kind of one of the things that we can learn here. Sorry, they're going out and about there. So one of the things I think we can learn is when we're kind of figuring out how we want to build a football team and we're interviewing for a job, all right, and we're coming up with a plan, and this goes for how we approach the hiring cycle or discussing the hiring cycle. Too often, I think we get into this, like, you're looking for somebody that did something, right? Someone was involved with the selection of Patrick Mahomes. Somebody was involved with the development of Josh Allen. All right. You get into these things, and that, look, all the credit in the world for them for doing it. Patrick Mahomes, the selection of Patrick Mahomes probably very easily could have been a selection of Mitch Trubisky. It could have been a selection of, there was one other quarterback in that draft, right? I just can't think of the name. Another player in that same area. The selection of the quarterback a lot of times is luck. Identifying a quarterback as a first-round talent, there's probably some skill that's involved with that. I shouldn't say there's some. There's a lot of work that goes into it. That gets into, assigning them to the right places. Favoring one player over another, there's obviously there's something to that as well. But, I think if you look at the general managers, the scouts, all the people that have worked in the league and have drafted these terrific, wonderful quarterbacks, and you said, well, let's see your quarterback board, I can guarantee you the busts that were selected right in front of them or right behind them were probably on their boards too. Like, I am sure Zach Wilson was rated number 2, number 3 by most of the people looking at quarterbacks that year. I'm sure Trey Lance was probably top 5. He might have been a little different. I think people thought that was a little bit of a reach there, number 3 overall, but I bet you most would have had a first-round grade for him. So that's number 1. When it comes to the development aspect of the players, look, Josh Allen is a great quarterback. Was Josh Allen way more raw than Patrick Mahomes and other players? Yeah, he was. But Patrick Mahomes is an elite level talent, and he's got a drive to want to win. You can't coach those things. So what you did was you took a legitimate, high level prospect that probably was going to develop no matter what into an above average quarterback. You helped them develop into that elite level of player. But it's not like you took a player that was garbage and you turned him into Josh Allen. You didn't take someone like Zach Wilson and somehow turn them into a star. The Lions offensive coordinator, who's going to be a very hot candidate, should be, he might be fine. A lot's going to be made of what he's done for Jared Goff. It's not like Jared Goff was an awful quarterback for the Rams. He was an okay quarterback for the Rams, and I think the situation there, it became like a toxic isn't the word. I don't think his personality meshed well enough with Sean McVay. McVay's a great head coach. I think he was looking for something different out of his quarterback, and I think his quarterback was looking for a different environment. And he found that environment in Detroit. It's not like they taught him to throw a football or anything like that. They've built an offense around his strengths, and I think that's a really good part of it. They haven't done crazy stuff. They've worked within his, skill set. But, I think that's the extent of it. You don't want to put it, because this is what happened with the Giants. It's like, this is the guy that made Josh Allen. No, he's not the guy that made Josh Allen. Josh Allen made Josh Allen. If you want to get to the nuts and bolts of these things, as you look, if you're following along on YouTube and, you look at the spending that I have here, the spending in these categories here, what you want to do is you want to see what the plan is when you don't have a good quarterback room. How can you be a relevant team when you don't have a good quarterback room? Right? Now, when you've got a awful quarterback room, there's not much you can do. But when you've got a okay quarterback, how do you build around that? And I would think, looking at this, using the Bears for an example, pull them back up here. I think what you see here is pretty logical, right? You've got a good defensive staff. Some ways a defensive head coach was a defensive head coach there. You've got adequate spending kind of across the board. Like, it's not blow away with the exception of linebacker, which is probably a mistake. But, you've got NFL average across the board. So you've got decent, solid players, I would say, at every position that's there. You look at the cap room on the Bears, and you see, again, for what's probably the second year or third year in the row, they're going to be top 5 or so in salary cap space. You say to yourself, okay, they're also setting up a situation where they have flexibility to every year, every 2 years they can probably get out of certain contracts, and every year they can keep adding. And that's the thing with the defense, right? We always look at the defense, and you look at a team like the Jets, and it's like, well, they were so good. What happened to their defense this year? And it's like, well, they're not changing anything. I know they changed Reddick. It's neither here nor there. He wasn't there for most of the year, but you want to be a situation where you can evolve the pieces or revolve the pieces on defense, because you need new faces on defense to kind of maintain. Like, being static on defense is not a good thing. If you're static on defense, you're going to get old on defense, and you're not going to be any good. You get static on defense, people pick up on your tendencies of the players, you're not going to be any good. Offensively, it's different. When you've got a stud at quarterback, you can have the same receivers. You can have some of those same parts. Defense, part of the reasons that we see these fluctuations, where it's good one year, awful the next, has to do with defenses getting older and more predictable, because we don't change the parts that are there. And it also has to do somewhat with what happens on offense, right? But I think what you want to look at is looking for someone that says, okay, this is our plan for how on defense we're going to have these certain players. We have a certain group that we consider core players at certain positions, whether that's, one edge or one interior player, maybe one secondary guy. And then everything else we look at, maybe one linebacker. The other 7 positions we look at as rotational. If we draft somebody, another player at edge, yeah, okay, we look at that as a 4-year player. But what about the other positions? Well, we don't want to get bogged down at safety for any more than 2. So let's have it so one safety is here for 24, 25. We're in a position to sign a good safety that'll be here 25, 26. And then we're in a position to sign another player that'll be 26, 27. Same goes for maybe corner. Same might go for other spots on the defensive line. When we get into the offense, you can't really do that probably at offensive tackle. You can do it at guard. You can do it at center. And I think you're coming up with ways, well, okay, how do we draft these positions that we can get those 4-year solutions that are in there and then fill in the rest of the spots through free agency? But again, if it's not working, we need to have the flexibility to be able to change. We've always want to be able to change. Where can we spend less? And this might be a mistake for the Bears. Tight end. Is bringing in, would they have Everett on the team at 6? Is that worthwhile when you've got Kmet? Maybe not. Overspending at receiver. There's a time and a place for probably doing those things. But I think those are the questions that you should be asking, a general manager, potential general manager, potential head coach. Like, how do you build around a developing quarterback? How do you build around a quarterback that never developed? Like, how do you improve the team by insulating around a subpar quarterback? And I think we don't do that. I think we focus too much. Let me pause that here. I'm getting Dropbox updates. I'll do that after. I'm not sure why that's popping through. Usually I don't have those notifications coming up, but they're popping up here and there. So anyway, the way that I would look at it is, how do you do that? And those are the questions that we should be asking. And, when we get into using consultants, that's the kind of stuff they should be doing. And I'll talk about the Jets for a second here. I was once again not in favor of them using a consulting group. Now, this is a little bit different. At least this is a football consulting group that's a little bit younger. I thought the Jets made a big mistake in basically letting the 33rd team leak this out, that they were in charge of part of the process. I won't say in charge, but they were part of recommending the general managers and I guess head coaches for the team. But I think at the moment it's GMs. And I think it just comes across as whatever. You know, it's like you've got your old GM that you fired, who was kind of a failure in Miami, and is more of a media personality at this point. And says some crazy stuff on TV in terms of how you would build a football team these days. And I like Mike. Look, I love what he did with the Jets. I don't know why people look back on him negatively. That was your best core. I wish he was never fired at that point in time. But you know, it's not a great look. Spielman is much more plugged in. I'm sure Spielman is the one that's going to run the search. But there's a big difference where you bring in Spielman and you say he's going to be part of the process versus bringing in the 33rd team, which is looked at as basically just a media outlet that for many people, and you know, I did the podcast with Sam. I love those two guys, Steve and Sam. You know, I think they're great, and I like a lot of the people who work at the 33rd team, but it is a lot of just like big lists that you see all the time on Twitter that they post up there, and you know, trying to find their niche, and it's like, you know, you can't have a group that you're saying is helping with the GM search when you've got, you know, probably an author that will have no input at all in any of this. But, you know, you've got Adam Schefter coming out there and it's like, oh, well, here was the 33rd team's ranking of potential GMs for the Jets. It's like, oh, man, you know. So I didn't like it. You know, my mind, you do an NDA. I say this all the time. I do consulting. I never once have gone out. Now, privately, yeah, I've told people if I'm looking to work with them, you know, maybe some people that I've done work for, but I don't think there has ever been a time where I've done something with a team, with an agency, an individual, and I jump online and I'm like, boy, I'm so glad to be consulting with this. I don't do that. Like, to me, that's completely unprofessional to say, oh, let me leak this to Adam Schefter so Schefter can put it out there like it's a giant signing. And it's just an awful look. And I don't know. Maybe awful is too strong of a word, but it's just, I just don't know why you would do that. You know, so anyway, hopefully they do a good job, you know, and improve the organization with that. I guess the other team to look at is the Raiders, who also had a, you know, terrible game. You know, but the Raiders, that's another team that was just set up for failure. Raiders are a reason why as well. Maybe you don't read into the interim head coaches so much. But they haven't given Pierce any kind of opportunity. I mean, they rank 32nd in contract value on the team, 31st in offense, 30th on defense, 32nd in active spending on the roster. They haven't had a lot of players hurt. You know, the 21st, but you know, whatever. It's right away. It's not that far away from the NFL average. You know, but it's like you look at these things and it's like you had no chance. And I know Devontae Adams used to be in these numbers and that would boost him a little bit, but that's not going to take him like the way Daniel Jones did. Yeah, that's a $20 million contract or so. You look at quarterback, they're 26th, running back 25th, wide receiver 27th, tight end 18th, interior offensive line 23rd, offensive tackle 21st. Like, you tell me what Antonio Pierce or anyone is supposed to do with that. Unless these are all stud rookies, what are you going to do with that? You know, defensively, you're 13th at edge, 10 on the interior, 30th at linebacker, 31st at corner, 24th at safety. All that means is if you don't get the quarterback on a sack, you know, or a really good pressure, you're probably not going to do anything defensively. So, again, this is a setup to fail organization. And I think that was done intentionally. Now, the question that I have there, because I'm sure they're going to change head coaches too, they have a lot of cap room, but I don't know. They're a cheap team. I don't know if that makes them an appealing job. Like, they don't have a quarterback under contract. They're not going to be a lock, I guess, to get the quarterback the way the Giants probably should be. I don't know. I don't know if it's an appealing job because they don't have the resources, or they don't use those resources. Like I look at when I'm looking ahead at these teams with the cap space, and I'll just look at the overall cap space. I won't look at the effective number here. The Patriots at 132, they're not a spending team. They had the 1 year where they spent. Otherwise, they're a cellar dweller. So, you don't have those resources, but they do have a quarterback. The Cardinals have spent in the past. They just haven't spent wisely, and they've been climbing out of a salary cap hole for so long that they finally have cap room now because they're out of it. Washington will see. Chicago will spend. Minnesota will spend. San Diego, LA, I guess we'll see. I think they'll spend, but I guess we'll see there. The Bengals have 65, but they had one time where I think they spent. I think they're going to be focused on figuring out what they do with their own wide receivers, and that's probably what they're going to do. Titans, I don't know if they'll open up or not. They're kind of lost right now. They're not going anywhere. And then you got the Packers at 62, and they're fine. But you look at some of those teams with those big numbers. You look at the Patriots and the Raiders, and the Patriots aren't going to make a switch this year. But, even though they have all that money, I don't know what they're going to go and do with it. Now, you don't want to go out there and go crazy in free agency anyway. But again, it's about finding ways to maintain flexibility with your team and bringing in, some quality players without getting into these contracts that are going to run, 3 years in length. That's kind of what you have to do. So, I think that, the Raiders are not going to be a very appealing job to people, at all next year. But again, you look at these numbers and you say to yourself, what opportunity did Antonio Pierce really truly have here? And I think that's kind of the big thing with it is, there's fair evaluations. Like Robert Saleh is, a fair evaluation. If we pull up the Jets numbers here, Jets rank 13th in total APY, 17th on offense, 10th on defense. They're 23rd in active cash, but that's just because they were so high last year and the year before that, Woody didn't want to go there. They do have 11 players on IR, which is a good number, a high number. They're ranked 15th in spending on quarterback, 27th on running back, but that's all draft picks they have there. So they've invested draft capital there, not wisely. 7th at wide receiver, 21st at tight end, nothing on offensive line, and that's probably been a mistake there. They're players that they've drafted, Elijah Vera-Tucker's been so-so. Tittman's been okay. Centers don't really make that kind of difference. Morgan Mose has been terrific. Simpson's been fine. Left tackle's been a mess. So that is what it is. 22nd at edge, 8th at interior D-line, 12th linebacker, 7th corner, and 28th at safety. So, and edge has 2 young players. Now, obviously, the one got hurt, but, that's where their spending is a little bit lower, in that category. And the McDonald's been fine. So, you look at that and you say, okay, that's been fair. You look at the Saints with Dennis Allen, and, 18th in annual value, 16th on offense, 24th on defense, 22nd in active cash, 17th at QB, 2nd at running back, 30th at wide receiver. That's been a miss right there. 4th at tight end, 14th on their offensive line, 3rd at edge, 28th interior, 5th linebacker, 30th at corner, but that's because Lattimore is gone. So that number was way higher, and 22nd at safety. So, there were opportunities with that roster. So you look at those teams, and again, I don't agree with the Jets' timing of their firing. Like, again, should have been done in the offseason, or, you let things be. But, at least these are opportunities for these teams, whereas some of these other ones really were, and some of it was their own doing. I wouldn't say the Raiders were their own doing. I'd say the Giants were. It's not putting yourself best foot forward to be a successful team. All right, let's take a look at questions, and then we'll wrap this one up. I did not get any email questions that I saw, which is a first. Guess that's what happens when you just throw these things out there real quick. And last week I told everyone I was probably not doing a podcast. All right, doesn't look like too much coming from Twitter today, so let's just take a look here. All right. So Stevie D, 889. What were some of the poison pill provisions that were outlawed, and what are some that are allowed now, player contracts? So I don't know if there's anything really allowed. It's more like finding a way that you would create something that is effectively a poison pill. So the poison pill provisions that were outlawed, and these involved, I think it was Seattle and Minnesota. And basically what they did is they had contracts that were for like franchise players that couldn't be matched because of incentives they put in there that were only applicable to one football team. It was like, if somebody has X amount of games played in a certain state, they would earn like a $50 million bonus. That's not actually what was in it. I don't remember off the top of my head exactly what it was. If a player's contract is not, it must always be the top, maybe the top contract for offensive linemen, on his team, knowing that team already had like a super high priced offensive tackle, and it would immediately like spike the value of his deal. So it was about putting in provisions that only impacted one team but not the other. So those kind of clauses were outlawed. It was like if you have a clause that is not going to be equal to both teams, then that clause doesn't have to be matched in a tag offer. So if somebody matched that offer, they wouldn't have to match that that particular part of the contract. Like it wouldn't be included. So that was kind of the ways that they did it. I don't think they ever outlawed what the Jets did with Curtis Martin. Now, that's not one that I think you would ever see used anymore because you're not going to see players become restricted free agents. Who are considered as good of a player as Curtis Martin was back in his prime. But what they did there is they crafted a contract that was essentially a 2-in-1. So it was a contract that ran, 6 years, 7 years, whatever the number was, who cares? But it was basically a deal that had an extremely high payment, I believe it was in the first year. And if I remember correctly, was a player option for the second year, not a team option, which is what most of these are. It was a player option. So basically what it would have done is it would have forced the New England Patriots to pay Curtis Martin, I don't know what the going rate was at that point in time. Let's call it $10 million. Probably wasn't that much, but might have been that much. To play for them in 1998, I think it was. Then Curtis could have opted out of that contract completely in 1999 with no threat of a franchise tag and become a free agent, at which point he would have just signed with the New York Jets. Option, so that was the thing. The poison pill in that was the player had all the control. He didn't want to be in New England anymore. He knew he might have to play a year in New England. They were going to make it to where financially it didn't make sense. So, he would, then he would end up going to the Jets afterwards, and he would honor that, that option. He's not going to opt out. Eventually they just came to whatever agreement, and they just did it, if I remember right, like a more straightforward contract. But that was basically what that provision was going to be. Years ago, there's a receiver. He's very active on social media. Andrew Hawkins. Fun follow. With a lot of the stuff that he does and some of the things that he talks about with the NFL and everything else. He was a restricted free agent with the Bengals? I think it was an RFA with the Bengals that signed with the Browns. I don't think I have that backwards. They did what I would consider a poison pill as well, which is kind of similar. They gave him a 4-year deal where 80% of the contract or something like that was paid out in the first 2 years of the contract. A team's not going to match that. That's a crazy high amount of cash to be paying for a player. especially where, at the back end of the deal, he might, if he plays really well, might want to raise and might not honor it. If he doesn't play well, you've really paid way too much for someone that, you're probably looking at as a third or fourth target in your offense. So he was able to go and sign with the other team. Yeah, he had an okay career. That was another one. The thing that I mentioned with Lamar Jackson was along those same lines, but it was figuring out, looking at the roster that the Baltimore Ravens had, what was the maximum amount of salary cap space that the Baltimore Ravens could create by either cutting players or restructuring every single player on the roster. Like, what was the maximum number they could come up with? When you figure out what that number is, give Lamar Jackson a salary cap number in the first year of his contract that's $1 million more than that. However high that number would have had to be. And it was going to be a pretty high number, like $90 million or something like that. But if you did that, you could craft a contract that the Ravens couldn't match because they could not open up enough cap room to be able to do it. Now, the only team I think that would have been that year had the possibility to do that was probably Atlanta. There may have been one or two others that could have finagled it. Atlanta was the one that probably had the open cap room to do it. The negative on that strategy is you're going to kind of hurt the rest of your free agency for that 1 year, but you're kind of waiving a year almost to do that. The 49ers did that with Garoppolo with the way they structured his contract, and then the back end worked out much better because they had a quarterback at lower cap hits relative to the rest of the league. So they were able to optimize their cap spending on all these other positions because they kind of looked at it like, first year Garoppolo, we're probably not competing for the playoffs anyway, at least for a deep run in the playoffs. So let's just get the big number out of the way. And that gives us a lot of flexibility with him if he doesn't pan out, which he really didn't. He was somewhere in the middle. And, it gives us the opportunity down the line to create kind of like a super roster around a quarterback who, at the time, was the highest paid player in the NFL. So I think that same kind of contract could work as a poison pill as well. King of Damnings. How much should Deron Bland get in a contract extension? I don't know. I'm still not into that kind of mode yet. I'm not sure here. Whoops, I am blacking out here. I'm sorry with all that stuff. I don't know what they would give him. I'm not sure what they would do. He's been hurt, I think, most of this year, right? So, his numbers before that were pretty high. I would guess they would kind of look at the other corner on the team and probably be in a similar number than that. But I think because of how Diggs's stuff has kind of worked out, I don't think that they will. I don't know. He's a free agent in 26. Yeah, they'll just let things play out. I don't think that they'll do whatever. But, if he's healthy, I would guess that's the numbers where he's going to. Stevie, Lamar Jackson poison pill video you did sent around a $280 million roster bonus 2 years in. Ravens wouldn't match it, but in reality, Lamar would never get it. It was a farce to get him somewhere else. Why don't more teams do that, especially in franchise tag scenarios? So that goes back to the question before. I don't know why teams don't do it. Some owners don't want to set a precedent. Like, you saw in Cleveland, that's an owner that was basically just gave the big FU to all the other 31 owners in the league and said, I don't care. Some of these guys don't want to do that. It's not collusion per se, but it is the one thing in the sense that you don't have these kind of renegade rebel owners that really want to push the envelope. And that has existed in the past. In the past, there has been competition, whether it's Seattle versus Minnesota, whether it was Jerry Jones in his younger days before now Jerry's all about the league. Maybe Snyder at times with Washington. You had Al Davis with the Raiders. You had basically renegade owners. That would go out and do things, whether it was in the draft, free agency, extensions. They would do stuff to try to better their teams rather than kind of towing some kind of league line. But in more modern times, maybe because the contract values have gotten so high, we've seen, we haven't really seen that kind of creativity anymore. And I think that, and I always say this, that partially it stems from the lack of fighting over rookie contracts these days. But I think that's kind of what happens. But it'd be nice to see more of that. Stevie, how did the Jets owe dead money to Reddick through 2027? He's on the last year of a one-year deal. Also, how does money on contracts work when a team trades a guy to Team B? So, for Reddick, and I don't think they owe him a lot, right? Right now, I think it's like $80. I don't know if I have more in there. I don't remember. They used void years in his contract. I'm sorry, it's one. So, no, it's $80. So, basically, because of the structure of his deal, they weren't allowed to add incentives to the contract without having them count against the cap. And the Jets didn't have cap room to allow them to count against the cap. In an in-season extension, any new incentive that's added counts as likely to be earned. So it counts on the cap in full. So the Jets had to fold it into an option bonus. This is what the Chiefs did last year with Chris Jones. They just followed the Chiefs' lead. So they put all those bonuses in there that would count as likely to be earned. It's around $5 million in bonuses or something like that. So that's the prorated money that's in the deal. But the reason that you see $80 as his dead money, the actual bonus itself is $100. So until he actually earns these things, like many of these things won't actually happen, these $1 million prorations. So what you'll see is the Jets will get credit for what's not earned in 2024, and these other years just simply won't count against the cap. It'll just be $80 that counts against the cap. Plus, he'll earn probably one thing. He might get enough playing time to qualify for his lowest level incentive, but it's because they use void years to prorate that out, that there may be some dead money that's associated with his contract. Butchie, hopefully Jets blow everything up. According to your draft trade models, what would you expect fair for Garrett, Sauce, Quinnen, Quincy, Brees, and Sherwood? That's a good question. So, with the two trade young guys, I mean, if you trade them with a year of control plus an option, I mean, that's at least 2 first-round picks, maybe plus more. I think Garrett Wilson is not looked at as an A-plus receiver, but he's certainly looked at as an A receiver. So that's 2 first-round picks at a minimum, maybe a little something else. Sauce is not coming off a good year. He struggled a little bit this year. I think the tackles are in his head, which is a problem. But, I think teams tend to overlook that at corner. So I'm thinking with Sauce, you're looking like a Jalen Ramsey, 2 first-round picks, I think is what that was. Similar kind of situation. So I think that's where Sauce Gardner would be. And so, I think, I'm not saying they're going to do it, but those are discussions that I think have to be, you have to have with people who are coming in. What would their plans be for their 2 young guys that are looking for contract extensions? Part of that falls on ownership, right? What does ownership say? What kind of budget does Woody have? Is Woody going to let you spend $30 million on a receiver and $25 million on a corner next year or in the next 2 years. Is he going to be willing to do that? Because if he's not willing to do it, then you have to have that plan to trade them. If he's willing to do it, should you do it? Those are discussions you have to have. I don't think there's going to be a big market for Quinn Williams. He's looking for an extension, or should be looking for an extension. I think he fits a specific type of defense, being more of a universal kind of plug-in kind of player. So I would think that's more of like a, fourth, fifth round pick kind of player. And did I say Quinnen or did I say Quincy? I might have gotten the first names there, I think, mixed up. So his brother, he would get more, but I don't know where that would be either. He's come on better as the season's gone on. Oops. Let me see where I've got Quinnen at right now. So I have him at 15 on his valuation. I didn't update that for last week. He'll be 28 next year, which is okay for that position. Solid presence. You look at, Leonard Williams. What did Leonard Williams get in a trade? And that was as a free agent. He'd get more than Leonard Williams. Williams a 3 and a 5? I don't know. Let's call it one round up from whatever Leonard Williams was. If Williams was like a 3.5, 2.4, 2.5, what you would get there. Breece Hall, I don't think there's going to be a market there. So I wouldn't even bother with it. I think Sherwood's a free agent. So, you're just looking there at compensatory stuff, which I don't know if you would really get anyway. Yeah, he's a free agent. So, he's probably going to sign for 10 or something like that. But I don't think there's going to be... I don't think you're going to get value in a trade there at all. All right, let's take a look here. Let me just take a look. Let me just pull something up over here real quick. No, that's all junk. Okay. All right. Let's see. Last set of things from X here, and then I'll look to see if anyone asked on Blue Sky. Fifth Chamber. Is there any chance on Earth Woody could ever fire his lackey? Bringing someone out. Actually looks to repair the fractured relationship between the ownership and our fan base. No, he's been there forever. He's not going to change that core group and that core group around him, whether they're enablers, whether they're yes men, whatever you want to call it, they're part of the problem. And he's not going to take them out of the equation. They should be taken out of the equation, take them out of the football part of it. Not gonna do that. McNichols or Westbrook, Key must win now. Non PPR, I have no idea. Westbrook, Keen, I go with him. Have we seen, a correction on the running back market with the recent success of the free agent backs? No, I don't think so. I think what you're seeing are, basically 3 outliers. Really more 2 outliers, I think, than the 3. I think what you're seeing is, and, Saquon, for all we want to talk about with Saquon, it's not like it's a monster contract, right? It's $12 million, which is, probably less than what the Giants offered him. I don't think it's a... I don't think you're going to see a market correction. I don't think you should see a market correction out of it. Again, that's my opinion. You don't look at outlier play. Like, is Christian McCaffrey having a good year? Ask yourself that. is Alvin Kamara having a good year? I'm not looking at some of these players and being like, yeah, it's universal that all these guys are having great years. But I mean, you look at Saquon Barkley, he's at 12.6. It's like, whatever. Jacobs is at 12. And Derrick Henry's all the way down at 8. So, I don't think that there's ever existed like, people get all over the stuff with the running backs and what you say about the running backs, and all you cap people, analytic people, whatever. You're always talking about you're cutting the running back short, you're selling them short, and you're doing this, that, and the other thing. It's like there never has been like a we refuse to sign running backs. It's what price range makes sense. Derrick Henry, $8 million with basically that, first year and guaranteed, and that's about it. Like, that is what it is. Jacobs, $12 million in guarantees. It's like those contracts are somewhat reasonable. Am I surprised at how some of them have played? Yeah, I am. But, I wouldn't look at this as like some massive, correction, that you really want to see. And again, it's really only Barkley that the contract is really anything of note. I wouldn't look at any of the other players and say that it's a, home run type of contract. I'm going to look at our valuations we have for the players. Obviously, Saquon is number one at $15 million. That's about as high as you can be as a running back. So, Derrick Henry's at 13.5. Josh Jacobs is at 13.2. Connor's at 12. So, I mean, Tony Pollard, that's another veteran. I'm just trying to find veterans. We have him at 9.9. We have Kamara at 11. So, I think it's just finding a number that works. But again, it's talking about, putting these players on teams that are also reasonable playoff contenders. Like Barkley wouldn't have put these numbers up on the Giants. And even if he did, even if he was doing the same thing, the Giants would still stink. That's the thing that drives you nuts. Like when the Raiders, they drafted the tight end, and he's terrific. Having an awesome year for him, right? The Raiders stink. Now, if you go next year and you look at the Raiders' outlook, is anybody going to say that, the Raiders' outlook is great because of Brock Bowers? And the answer is no. They're going to say the outlook is awful because they don't have a quarterback. It's going to say the outlook is bad because they don't have an offensive line. The outlook is bad because they can't play defense. Nobody's going to look at it that way. And that's the thing, that when you get into, and this is about running backs, this is about tight ends, this is about linebackers, it's about all these things. They're not going to lead you to have success. Building the best 53-man roster often does not mean having the best running back, the best linebacker, the best tight end. Maybe you do end up with those players at some point in time. But if we're building, especially if we're building from kind of the ground up, that's not what you build with. That's not the foundation, of your pyramid. In many ways, it's kind of like an upside down pyramid that you probably see in the NFL. The quarterback is kind of there, when that cracks, the whole pyramid starts to topple. But, it's not those positions that make or break a team. Those are the positions that maybe can put you over the top. They're positions that maybe have a value add on the right team. But you have building blocks that you have to put in place first before, any of that can be valuable. And the same holds true with the running backs. You look at the Packers situation, all right? Green Bay could afford to kind of overspend a little bit there because they do have so many young players on that team that don't make a lot of money. So you look at the Packers, this year they are 11th or 12th in cap room. And you look next year, 10th in projected cap room, right? And so they've got the quarterback under contract, but they've got so many young players. And, investment wise, they're getting by with just a lot of, youthful talent. I'm pulling up their numbers. A lot of this is like the Bears, at least on offense. 23rd overall, 24th on offense, 11th on defense, 14th active cash. They haven't been hurt. That's been a big help for them. But, quarterback, they rank 4th because they invest in Jordan Love. They make the jump at running back. Part of the reason they do that is because they're spending on wide receivers 32, but their quarterback is able to get something out of those wide receivers they have, and they're young wide receivers that, on a game, from game to game you might have a different player pop up and they have some upside. 24th at tight end, they have a younger player there, he's fine. 15th interior, they're getting by with their offensive tackles. They've invested a lot in their secondary, and they don't really invest at all, up front, or they don't invest as much up front. But again, it's a lot of young players on that team, so it's like we like the young players that we have on our team. So, we can spend there. We envision ourselves being a playoff team. We think that'll help us a little bit, and it's helped them a little bit. It's given them, a nice little red zone option or whatever. The Eagles are massive spenders. Now, the Eagles, it's always more about what's going to happen with the long term. But, you break down the Eagles, second overall in spending, first on offense, 21st on defense, 6th at quarterback, 8th at running back, 3rd at wide receiver, 13th at tight end, 13th on the interior O-line, 3rd at offensive tackle. They envision themselves as a great offensive team, and they're putting the money in on that. Defensively, they're 10th at edge, and then everywhere else, except for corner where they're 4th, but they know they're deficient because they have a lot of old players that are there. It's like, again, you're trying to use youth and reasonable contracts to balance out where you're trying to kind of hit home runs on all these other positions. And then finally, the Ravens, the other team, I guess, that gets mentioned there, 9th at QB, 3rd now at running back, 13th at receiver. It's just a lot of receivers that they have there. 10th at tight end. And, they haven't done with the offensive line. They're 31st and 25th, but one of those is their tackle, who is healthy and having a good year this year. Defensively, they haven't spent on their pass rush, but they spend everywhere else, right? Interior 9, 4 at linebacker, 5 at corner, 9 at safety. So, you're looking at where you are in terms of being a playoff team, and this was 1 year. It's like maybe this takes a little pressure off our quarterback in some of these games where we get in the red zone or we need someone to close a game out. Maybe this gives us the ability to do that. So, I think you have to look at those different situations before you do it. But I don't envision that this is going to lead people to be like, yeah, we need $15 million running backs, $20 million running backs. Doesn't make any sense. Stevie again. I'll throw one more. How do the early 2000s Redskins teams always have money for free agents? At what point will the Saints have to pay the piper for what they keep doing, which is the continuous restructures? So theirs will happen really next year, and maybe a little bit the year thereafter. So that's probably when that'll be. But Washington was kind of the same boat. Like they pushed a lot. They were one of the first teams to do that, and so they would go through these fluctuations. But back then, remember, you didn't have a lot, with the exception of the rookies, you didn't have a lot of the base guarantees. And your signing bonuses for a while, you could prorate over 7 years and then 6 years. So there were a lot more tricks that you could kind of do with the cap when it came to releasing players and June 1s and, kind of deferring those cap hits out with those 7 and 6 year prorations versus what we have now. And you could also get out of things, right, because they didn't have those guarantees. So the June 1 was more of a realistic option because, if you screwed up, you might have paid a lot in that first year, maybe even the second year, but there was no vesting guarantee in the third year, a real guarantee in the third year. Probably wasn't even one in the second. It was probably an option bonus that was virtually protected based on the structure of the contract. Tulane Cubs. Which teams seem to have the best handle on gaining comp picks, and which seem to have the worst? Maybe a follow up. The Bears seem bad at this, are they? I'd have to go back and look. Nick, I think Nick has an article that has some compensatory pick analysis like that. I don't know if we have that online. I'm sure there's an article on it. I don't know if I have it in an easy to find place. He would definitely have it as a article, and I don't think I'm going to search for that. And I have something that I use for people that I do stuff for, where we do that kind of compensatory evaluation. I'm not going to pull that up and put that up on screen now because I do that as again, that's kind of a consulting thing. The Ravens have typically been very good at compensatory picks. San Francisco, I think, is another team that's very good at that. And then you've got teams that just don't care. Saints at times, Jets. They're the teams that you see, Carolina, that are, active a lot in free agency year over year. Maybe Jacksonville, Miami probably fits that category. They're probably not going to get a lot of compensatory picks. I have to look. If I remember, I'll try to do a search on that and have that for next week, and then see. TC, what's the impact of Tyron Smith to IR on the Jets cap next year? Probably not too much. I haven't been able to get a handle on his contract. I've gotten conflicting numbers on it. So there might be some credits that they will get because he's not going to hit certain incentives when it comes to play time. And, he'll lose a little bit on the per game bonuses that he has in there. Those might be prorated too. I know he doesn't have per gamers in there. So he has some incentives that might be counting on the cap, might not be counting on the cap. I'm not 100% sure. But there might be some credits for that. I thought he had per games. I guess not. So I don't think it'll make too much of a difference. Brian, does the next Jets GM hire the next coach, or does the 33rd team make a joint suggestion about a GM head coaching pairing that passes by unanimous consent? So I believe the way that this is going to work is that, and I don't know if they're going to be involved in the coaching aspect of it. My assumption is that Spielman will come up with a list of names for general manager. I won't give you who I think the names will be, but I have a feeling I know a lot of them that'll be on that list. He may or may not pare that list down. I don't know the way that will work. My guess is Mike will communicate that list to Woody Johnson and Woody Johnson's group. And, then they'll go from there. I don't think that it will be... I don't think this is going to be that the 33rd team gives them one name and is like, yeah, this is who we see. I'm pretty sure it's going to be... It'll probably be an initial list of 15 to 20 whittled down to 5. My guess is the list of 5 is what ends up on Woody's desk. That's my guess. And then from there, they will probably have a representative or two that's part of the interview process. And, that'll be part of a group discussion as to who they bring in. I'm going to assume that they won't be involved with the head coaching search, but maybe they will be. Maybe, maybe they'll be part of that. But I think you wait to see. I think you wait to see where the GM lands and then what they do after that, because I think the GM needs to have more input. If if it was me, I think the Jets should let him hire the general manager, but I'm sorry, the general manager hire the head coach. But I don't know if that'll be the case. Dallas, what's OBJ's crypto payout worth these days? Got to be quite a bit, right? Look, it's a very risky way to put all your money. When you've made a lot, you can take those kind of risks. It's still a lot of money, but it's like when you look at all that money that he's made with the Giants and the Browns, doing future salary to where it converts to Bitcoin or whatever. It's probably reasonable, because as long as he hasn't blown that early money, there's always a fail safe that's there. But he's done pretty good, right? Michael, should the Jets do a hard reset and just eat all dead money in 25, or should they do post June 1s on two of the following: Rogers, Mosley, and Adams? So, all right, my own opinion on it is just eat the money. But you could do that on Rogers. I don't think Mosley's contract is set really for a June 1 that makes any sense. So for Mosley, you would carry 12.8. If you June 1 him, you'd still be taking an 8.8 charge. You'd only be deferring 4.5. Like, I don't see the purpose in that, because their cap situation shouldn't be so bad that they need the money to sign like rookies. Like that's the only way I think you would June 1 a player like CJ Mosley. If I'm the Jets, I look to see if there's a team that'll give me a conditional 7th round pick to take his salary. And I would trade him. But I don't know if I don't know if they would even find a taker for that. They missed the boat. The thing that they did with his contract should have been done last year. I said it over and over and over and over and over again, and they never did it. And I don't understand why. It doesn't make sense. They waited a year too long, so you guarantee too far in the future, and he's been hurt. And who's the other one? Devontae Adams. Let me just pull them up individually. Let's see. So, no, you're not going to June 1 him, because he would count at 38 on your cap, and all you'd be doing on your defer on that is you'd be deferring $6 million, so you could have him at 2. There'd be no purpose to it. Unless they felt like they needed to front load like a Garrett Wilson extension. I don't think they would. I don't think that there would be I don't think that there would be any logical reason to do that. So I think Rodgers is the only one that kind of makes sense, because his cap hit next year is like 20 something? 23.5. You'd have 49 dead on a regular cut, but on a post June 1, you'd drop that to I'm sorry, I meant the wrong thing. You drop it to 14. So, I could see them doing that with Aaron Rodgers, and deferring the money, but you wouldn't do it with any of the other players. But if it's me, I'm just taking $100 million in dead money, for all these guys whose contracts void out, and I'm just saying that's that. All right, let's see if we got let's see, what have I got here? I have no idea. Let's see. Oh, a nice thing from Greg Thompson about the who he's been reading to learn more about the salary cap, and I'm glad to be a part of that. So you've got myself there. Brad is listed. Troy, Texans cap. Miguel, Pats cap. Joel Corey, Danny Heifetz, Ken Ingles. That's the fun part of the community, and I know Brad isn't able to do it as much anymore. It's a fun part of it, and I always enjoy it because when I see names, with the exception of Joel on that list, and Miguel too. He's been doing it before me. But you see names on there, and it's like, they kind of like, oh, like I read what you do, and it's kind of interesting, and how do I learn more about it? And you see that's there. So let me like that. I think that's a very nice thing to say. I don't always see these things. So, Danny's a good dude. It's I'm just looking. If you're following along on video, you can see it. It's a cool thing. I always have looked at this as, I enjoy talking about the contracts, talking about the cap, and I always feel like, and I'm giving myself a little pat on the back here, that my little contribution to the NFL stuff hasn't been having tables and charts and focusing on, the cap situations of teams and doing that. It's that there's a coverage of this aspect of the NFL that did not exist 10 years ago that exists now. 12 years ago, 13 years ago, 15 years ago, depending on what it is, and it exists now. When someone, and I'm going to toot my own horn here with the stuff where I talk about, and it's not a consulting thing, but, this has been in public forum where it's been, I've been in Monday Morning Quarterback for stuff before, when Peter King would, call you up and ask you a question, and he quotes you in an article, or you help him, that you got to write an article that he would include in his column. Like, that's awesome. Because it gives you someone to kind of give an outside, I think, kind of unbiased perspective versus having to go to somebody on a team to, give you something. And, I think that's been really cool. All right, let's see if we got anything at Blue Sky here. I'm going to guess probably very little, but let's see. Okay, we got a couple. All right, here we go. We got Gary. 3 things you would do if you were the Seahawks GM in terms of caps and deals. Man, Seahawks, I don't really give them much thought. I would have never done some of the deals that they have there right now. Like, for where they are as a team, like, I think they've pushed way too much. They're over on the cap next year. So I'm looking. All right, so I'm probably cutting Tyler Lockett. Let me just see where he's at. That's my opinion on it. He's a mid-30s. Look, he's a lifelong player. He can still play a little bit. I mean, you could look to bring his salary way down. His salary next year is 15, 16, 17. You could look to bring that down to 10. I would probably just say it's time to make the split and just move on. I think with DK Metcalf, I think there's going to be a lot of talk here, and I think you can justify trading him. I think you can justify extending him. He's still very young. All things considered, I'd probably lean towards an extension, to lower that cap number. But I mean, you look at just some of these other guys that they have. I'm just pulling up their contracts now. Draymond Jones has been a disappointment. I think it's $14 million to cut him on the cap. I think that's reasonable, to cut, or to, again, you're trying to bring his salary down. Leonard Williams, he's been okay. They pay him to be a pass rusher, and he's not. And man, all these guys are like 30. I don't know. Wosu, that's just never worked out. That's to me, that's a cut if he's healthy. You go save 8-5. I think that Seattle needs to be kind of in cutting and moving mode, and you're just deciding, do you want to do kind of like, I guess, what would really be your rebuild year, but instead of going all in on that and like getting rid of Geno, do you want to come back with Geno Smith again, have DK Metcalf still on the team, and just be like, look, those are going to be your guys in the in the passing game, and we're just kind of playing out the string with some of these other guys, and you start making those moves where Lockett goes off the team, Jones goes off the team. You start taking some of those defensive players off the team. I kind of think that's probably what I would do. All right, Tate. Hey, Tate, what's up? Tate and I go back a long ways. Probably been discussed one way or another on previous pods, but I'd love to hear your thoughts on what the 49ers should do moving forward. Talented but aging and expensive core, plus the Purdy decision. Do you try to extend the window? Bit of a rebuild on the fly. So I think looking at San Francisco, I really don't even have to probably pull them up because I'm pretty positive that, that San Francisco, because of the decisions that they made, are very much a kind of what you see is what you get roster. Meaning, as you look through, if you're following along, cutting Trent Williams next year, you lose $33 million in cap space. Cutting Nick Bosa, obviously that's not going to happen, but you lose 52. Cutting Fred Warner, you lose 300, or you only gain 300,000. Getting rid of Debo, you lose 15.5. Now there's some options with Debo. I think I have his numbers in there wrong. You can June 1 him. And I think I probably would June 1 him, but George Kittle, you're only gaining 1. You're losing on McCaffrey 16. You're losing Ayuk at 50. So you look at it. What you see is what you get, right? It's like the Eagles. It's like the Saints. It's like the Browns. This is the team. You can't really go in there and make wholesale changes. So, I think I would look at this, unless I have the numbers wrong on Debo, I think I'm cutting Debo as a post-June 1. He's not happy. He's not productive enough anymore. So I think you move him off the team because it's a massive investment, that you have to make in him because he has an option that's due next August if you can't trade him. I think it's due in August. So, you move him and you move on from there. But I think everything else, you're just kind of planning for the future. So I think with Purdy, I think you're going to keep him, right? I think you need to let your cap guys, you need to let Parag, you need to let Brian Hampton, let those guys run the show. Don't let John Lynch run the show. John Lynch should kind of cede the authority to them to try to get a deal that doesn't top Dak Prescott. He might not have a choice. It might be that it's not going to happen no matter what. But I am letting my cap guys, all those guys, handle a difficult negotiation versus what's gone on too often, I think, which is Lynch just kind of, I'm not going to say just gives in, but I think when push comes to shove, Lynch is going to always end up making a deal, even when the deal probably is not in the best, interests of the San Francisco 49ers. I'm going to push on Christian McCaffrey to take a pay cut. You gave him the raise. It didn't work out, so take the raise away, and bring it right back to where it was. So I think that's what you have to do. But I think other than the Purdy extension, which is going to eat up a lot of your cap room, probably half of it, I think you have to go in there and you're just kind of, riding this out, and you have to have the, you've got to have the strength to, once again, when Trent Williams is barking for an extension, and maybe Fred Warner, is he getting close to the end of his deal? No, he's got 2 left. Fred Warner is asking for it, and let's see, Ward is going to be free agent. Let me see who else pops up. Debo and Kittle, maybe, I don't know if Kittle's going to ask, maybe asking for an extension, and Hargrave. Oh, that's an interesting one. I didn't even pop into Hargrave there. I know I have the post-June ones on him. What's Hargrave next year? You save 3-2. You're bringing his salary down or you're cutting him, right? That's what I'm doing is I'm going to subtract those kind of players, from there. I'm not giving in on extensions. Hargrave, I think I might just cut it and just move on. Don't give in anymore on these extensions. And, the Ayuk thing was an awful look for them. You let a guy basically say, I'm not going to practice. I'm not going to practice. I'm going to try to find myself a contract with another team. Didn't really happen. And you still went in there and paid more or less top dollar for him. And he hasn't been any good this year. So, I think you ride this out and you kind of do that rebuild on the fly because you don't have those options, to really go in there and just say, okay, we're going to cut and start rebuilding. But I think the spots like Hargrave where you can gain a little bit, I think those players are the kind of players you probably do move on from. Just to avoid paying those salaries this year. I wouldn't put Kittle in that category because it's not that high, but I'm not paying Hargrave, $21 million next year. That doesn't make any sense. Take the dead money, say, we botched it up with the way we did the contract. Eat it now. It gets you in a better position for 2026. Instead of having to deal with, cutting him that year where you're going to have 17 on the cap. You'll be free and clear at that point. So, I think those are the kind of moves you kind of want to look at, if you're San Francisco. But, I don't look at theirs as a situation that's even reasonably good. Like, I look at it as a, not a very good situation there. But I'm not trying to extend the window by doing even more restructures so I can sign guys. I'm just signing Purdy and starting to cut players and figuring out what we do from there. And I think the coach and GM under contract for a while, so I don't think there should be any pressure on them, to always be, really just investing too much, I think, in that roster. Batman Beyond. What should the Cardinals do in March after re-signing Connor today? I don't know. I have to take a closer look at Arizona. Arizona needs a lot of help. They're very much on Murray, and I don't. Murray's a good. I don't know if I put him in the great category. They have a lot of cap room. They have to go out there and they just have to be smart with what they do. They can't do what they did with the last GM, which is just dumb signings. You got to be smart. Where I talked about like having that flexibility, like you're signing guys. If you've got $100 million in cap room, and obviously this isn't going to be that crazy on the cap. Let's say they have, even if you've taken rookies into account, let's say $70 million in cap room. Sign $40 million in players. And, carry that money over to the next year. So you can keep building in free agency as you see what you need, post-draft. So, you're filling in a lot of those voids that you have this year, as well as, drafting players. You're evaluating everything, and you're making sure you have enough money next year, in 2 years from now, in 2026, to continue to add and continue to supplement those draft players and get those free agents that you signed last year off the team and replace with a whole new group of guys. Like that's the strategy that you need to utilize. Okay, let's see. I think there's just one more from Tom here. What's the inflection point between paying a quarterback's second contract and drafting a new one? Just how good does a quarterback have to be to warrant the investment? Seems like the league thinks a decent starter is the minimum. But should the line be there, would teams be better off risking the draft? So I think teams would be better off risking the draft as we get a new appearance from Megan, who is showing me the winners of the Survivor Series. Rhea Ripley has won. Thank you, Megan.
They showed a clip of her getting like smacked in the stomach by Liv Morgan.
Wow. There you go. Crazy. Okay, thank you, Megan.
Right.
No. All right, here you go. So we're getting our Survivor Series updates for any of you wrestling fans.
They sent something else.
Megan is very into this, especially the female wrestling.
I don't know where it went, but they just sent a video.
All right, well, you can show me the video later.
Sky.
Okay, here we go. You can't watch it, but... Oh, that was a very big ouch. Okay, Megan, thank you. All right, so anyway... I see.
Didn't he used to fight against Seth Rollins?
Yes, Megan. I think so. And Megan's friend Tiffy time. Megan loves Tiffany Stratton. Right, Megan?
Yes.
Yes. Does she win? Or no?
No, I don't know.
Okay. All right. Thank you, Megan. I will see you shortly.
I have a question.
What, Megan?
How long does she have to cash in?
Until next year. I don't know when that is.
Well, is it like
You watch it more than me, but
the next year, or is it until like the next Money in the Bank?
the next Money in the Bank, I think.
Okay.
I think that's the rule. All right. There you go. So you get your wrestling updates here as well. There you go. All right, back to Tom's question here. So, bye, Megan. So many years ago, when discussing quarterbacks, I kind of made a comment, and I think it's true, but at the same time, there's probably not enough players in the draft to do this with. You should be approaching things as a team to where, unless you've got an absolute sure thing, you don't invest in the player at the position. And that you are always looking in the draft to find somebody. Now, that might mean drafting players in the second round, third round, fourth round. It might not always mean in the first round. But, I think that that's the way that it should be. I mean, if you look just from a productivity standpoint, all right, Dallas should not be spending $60 a year on Dak Prescott. The Jaguars should not be spending $55 a year on Trevor Lawrence. Packers probably should not be spending $55 a year on Jordan Love. Dolphins should not be at $53 a year on Tua. I don't really think the Lions should be at $53 on Goff. Obviously, the Browns shouldn't be at $46 on Watson. I wouldn't be at $45 for Cousins. I wouldn't be $37 for Carr, but that's a little iffier. I think what you need to do is start to create this middle tier where instead of saying Trevor Lawrence is young and he's a former first overall pick, I need to invest 55. It's more like, maybe I need to go back in the draft and find a quarterback. And look, Lawrence is better than I think some believe, but he's also never played good enough to warrant this kind of contract. He's played well enough in terms of what the market is, but in terms of building a football team, I almost think that you would be better off saying, let somebody else pay him that 55 and you take those draft picks for him. But in reality, you need to get to a point, and that point is only going to happen when, you let a lot of these players walk. And look, some of them are going to end up justifying those contracts. Love may justify 55. Lawrence may justify the 55. Goff may justify the 53. It's entirely possible. But you need to get to a point where and it's only going to be created through a market. And some of these teams are going to have to take that risk, which is not a, teams don't like taking those kind of risks. To where you do create an environment where teams, when they sign these players as free agents or trade for them, start to get gun shy because of how bad the results are. And at that point in time, you do end up creating, a marketplace that exists where you probably do have a bunch of quarterbacks in that Baker Mayfield range at $33 million a year. So let's say if Joe Burrow is the legit number one at 55, that now we have Dak Prescott at 40 again. We have Jordan Love at like 43. We have Tua down at 35. We have Goff around 40. Who cares about Watson? You get Cousins down around 35. You start to create a system then that kind of, gives you an ability to take one of these quarterbacks who aren't great. Like Trevor Lawrence, realistically, if you take the market out of it, Trevor Lawrence should be on a contract that has upside of $55 million a year through incentives and downside of like 30 to 35. And then if you're Jacksonville, you can build a really great team around that to where you only need him to be a serviceable, slightly above average option. Dallas would be far better off with Dak Prescott still at 40, where you're building around a serviceable, aging quarterback versus a guy that needs to play at the level of 60. But you should be, when you look at these players, you shouldn't be faced with these decisions where, it just hangs over you like, you don't pay us or you're screwed. It needs to be a situation where, you have that backup option because you drafted someone. And, the way that I always look at it is that when you draft somebody, those draft picks have value. Even if those players don't play, at the very least, unless you make them screw up, like on the field somehow, you'll get a first round pick back for them. You should. So I don't think there's any harm in drafting. And I think it's a mistake that teams don't do it. Now, granted, the player pool isn't there. But, if you're Jacksonville, all right, before they did this extension, if you're a team like that, and let's say you finished in a year to where you have the 12th pick overall, and there's a Bo Nix sitting there. I don't remember what he went, 10 or 11, but let's just say that's where it is. And that player's there. There's no harm in drafting him. No harm. The worst, you have a really good backup quarterback, even if you can't trade him, that you need the next 3 years. And having that backup quarterback is valuable because players go down, and when players go down, you don't want to have to turn to, the journeyman guy who, probably isn't going to give you a ton. Like if Minnesota, now, very different situation. Minnesota does have kind of a journeyman as their starter, but, let's say that the rookie was playing this year and he was having a good enough season. At this point in time, would you rather turn to Daniel Jones? Let's say he was as a legitimate backup quarterback making $5 million. Or would you rather turn to, say, a Bo Nix, who you don't know anything about, but is only making a couple of $1 million and could develop into a starter? Like, to me, that makes just so much more sense in terms of bettering your team, bettering yourself for leverage, bettering your trade outlooks at times. Like, it's a much better way, I think, to approach it. All right, let me see if there's anything else here. I don't think so. I think that should be it. All right, so that should do it for me. So thank you very much for listening. 3 weeks in a row. That's got to be some kind of modern record for me doing a podcast. Hopefully we can make it 4, and I'll be back again next week. We do have a basketball game next Saturday. Our first game for the kids playing basketball. They're only giving us one practice before a game. I am not a big fan of that, but so be it. Basketball, hopefully they have fun playing. So I'll clue everybody in on that next Saturday. So anyway, everybody have a great week. Thank you very much for listening, and I will talk to you all again soon.